Hi, everyone.
Greetings. We're in the Pure Worship book.
Yep.
In the last segment, they were looking at the elders in the dark, in the temple, in Jerusalem. Ezekiel knew there were problems in Jerusalem, but now he's being shown more problems in Jerusalem. And this is all to make the point that this is not pure worship that's going on here. So we have, 2 paragraphs in the subhead?
Yeah, the subhead is the third scene, women weeping over the god TAMMUZ.
And here's the text, which is Ezekiel chapter 8, verses 13 and 14. He said also to me, "You will see still greater abominations that they commit." Then he brought me to the entrance of the north gate of the house of Yahweh, or the Lord, and behold, there sat women weeping for Tammuz. And they have a very large picture of the women weeping for Tammuz on the previous page.
So they do all 4 scenes, and that top one with the women hands up and crying.
So obviously this is a very big issue for them, that this is unacceptable to God's people, right?
All right.
So what do they comment?
Here
How
are
do they apply it?
their comments. Following the first 2 scenes of detestable practices, Jehovah again told Ezekiel, "You will see detestable things that are even more terrible than that they are doing." What then did the prophet see next? At the entrance of the north gate of the house of Jehovah, he saw women sitting and weeping over the god TAMMUZ, a deity of Mesopotamia. Tammuz is called Dumuzi, I don't know, in Samaritan text, and is thought to have been the consort of the fertility goddess Ishtar. Then they have a footnote there that says, and it's in very small print, it says, "There is no factual basis for the claim that Tammuz is another name for Nimrod."
More on that in a minute.
Yeah. The Israelite women were evidently weeping as part of some religious ritual connected with the death of Tammuz. By weeping over Tammuz in Jehovah's temple, those women were carrying out a pagan ritual in a center for pure worship. But a false religious observation was not sanctified by being carried out in God's temple. Why, from Jehovah's standpoint, those apostate women were doing detestable things. The next paragraph. What lesson can we learn from Jehovah's view of what those women were doing? To keep our worship pure, we must never mix it with unclean pagan practices. Hence, we must have nothing to do with observances that have pagan religious origins. Does origin really matter? Yes. Today, the practices associated with certain observances, such as Christmas and Easter, may seem harmless. But let us not forget that Jehovah saw firsthand the pagan religious practices that eventually have become modern-day observances. In Jehovah's view, pagan practices do not become less detestable with the passage of time, or through efforts to mix them with pure worship.
So what's being omitted here? First of all, there's the element of time, from the calling of Abraham to these events in the inner rooms of the temple and outside the temple. There's 1400 years or so gone by.
You might think that it's just started up, this impurity.
Yes, this impurity, therefore, is really nothing new. If you think about the whole period, you realize, wait a minute, Abram was called when he and his ancestors had been in a place that was focused on what we would now call false worship. It was, as Joshua plainly says, before he dies, your ancestors across the river worshipped other gods. Okay, so their roots, their origins, as you put it here, were paganism. That doesn't disqualify them as God's people. He calls them out. But even when they're called out, are they pure? Are they ever pure?
Yeah.
Because think of Rachel 3 generations later.
That's right.
Or Joseph 4 generations later. They're carrying paganism with them, like Rachel did, or they're in the middle of a pagan context, like Joseph was, and Moses was raised in that. And then you've got David later, right? Okay.
Yeah.
During this entire period, Yes, they're sometimes worshiping according to the law of Moses, doing the festivals, but they're adding other stuff like.
Well, in the case of David, you remember the story when Jonathan tells his father to find out his father's true feelings, that David has gone to be with his family for the new moon festival.
Where's the new moon festival in the law of Moses?
It's not there, but it was the practice of all peoples in those neighborhoods.
They kept lunar festivals, they kept solar festivals, they kept seasonal festivals. All of this was already in what you call the pagan world before some of it was appropriated for the law of Moses and put to other uses. But some of it wasn't. They just took over the cultures that they were immersed in. The new moon festival is a good example of that.
Yeah.
Solomon marries all these pagan wives, but he's used mightily of God, as David had been, as Moses had been, as Joseph had been, and as Daniel would be in the future.
And I think in the stories of Joseph and Daniel, what is interesting is that what is publicly visible and what is not publicly visible, that you would think should be as a witness. So as a witness, you think, well, they would be talking about their God, Jehovah. And yet Joseph and Daniel don't in public ever use the name. But at the same time, they accept being placed in positions that are openly pagan, politically and religiously.
Worldly, anyway, if you don't want to call them pagan. They're in worldly politics, and they're tainted by pagan religion.
Chief of the Magi, magic practicing priest, and he's the chief of them? I mean, I think you'd have a problem with that as a witness.
So all of these 1400 years, God's people have been tainted by, at least, paganism. But he's continued to use them. Not because they are faithful and pure worshippers, but because he is faithful.
Yeah, and it's not guilt by association.
Yeah.
You know, Joseph and Daniel were exiles and placed in these positions and given names of the false gods. There's no evidence that they resisted that, and it didn't taint them so that they wouldn't be usable for other things.
So contrary to what you're taught as a Jehovah's Witness, your standing before God does not depend on your faithfulness.
Yeah.
We need to say that over and over again, as we will, because they keep emphasizing that it does. Origins mean something to them, but not to the God, the true God of the Bible.
Yeah. So in that second paragraph, they've got people observing things like Christmas and Easter, and they're saying that these are pagan practices, but at the same time, people who are participating in them, they seem to acknowledge that people don't think of them as pagan, but it doesn't excuse them.
No,
it doesn't
because of
make them not practicing something pagan. So the expectation is they'll all be destroyed at Armageddon.
Yeah, you have no problem with that.
Yeah. So, and yet, this little footnote incident too. I think it's curious that you used this Nimrod thing big time. I remember it.
The Watchtower used that for generations.
Yeah. They believed that was the connection to Babylon.
Yeah. So
And
Nimrod
now
built Babylon.
They're dropping it quietly, or in small print anyways. Not even making any mention of it, that they used to think this.
So the thing that you built on this assumption, this conclusion that Nimrod was somehow Babylon, and therefore anything that's from Nimrod is, like this TAMMUZ thing, is automatically false
Tainted.
Religion.
Yeah.
That's the superstructure that's built on this foundation is still there. You're still saying Babylon the Great, but you've pulled out the foundation of the superstructure, which is the connection Nimrod and Babylon. Like you say, though, that this is too little, too late.
Yeah.
Because this is what poisons the mind of Jehovah's Witnesses and ex-Jehovah's Witnesses against even considering the claims of the churches.
When they make these quiet little changes, do you really think that the average witness has changed the way they're going to present things? I don't think so. Yeah, I think they still believe that. It's so ingrained in their head. They're pushing forward with the same agenda, even if the Watchtower changes the agenda.
That's right. We even have the ex-witness community weighing in on this frequently. We get comments, by the way, on our channel to the effect that this is connected to Nimrod and Babylonian religion, when
Yeah.
that has even been dropped by the Watchtower.
Yeah.
And it was never very good source of information to begin with. Hislop, by the way, does not believe that the Trinity is a pagan teaching, but you get that impression from your
the way they
sources being
present
filtered.
things. Yeah.
So no, Hislop was never a very good source to begin with, but now you've dropped him.
Yeah.
But you have not kept the impressions you got from him.
Yeah. And your people are still using him.
Or rather, you
Or
have
at
kept.
least
Did I say not?
believing. They're believing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you said not.
No, you've kept the superstructure, but abandoned the foundation.
Yeah. So we're going to link actually to one that you did on the two Babylons and whether or not Hislop was proving the Trinity
To be
was
pagan.
pagan.
Yeah.
So we'll link that.
See you shortly.